Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 24 playthrough of the Buffalo Wings. We are at the 2037 Amateur First Year Player Draft today. It's been an okay season for the Buffalo Wings as we try to defend a World Series championship. 37 and 31 record, so we're three and a half behind in the NL East, third place, and we're also actually half a game out of the final wild card spot at this point. But the team is playing its best baseball of the year here in June. We've got a 12 and 6 record in June so far. We've still got one of the top offenses in the National League, and our pitching staff is improving. Our starting pitching got off to a pretty slow start this year, even though 4 of the 5 players from one of the top rotations in baseball last season were back with us this year. So that started to normalize a bit over the last several weeks as well. And as I said, we've been playing good baseball recently. So we've got about 5.5 weeks till we get to the trade deadline. Certainly an opportunity to add some talent. Center field is a position where some of you have commented on the poor year that we are getting at this point from Dylan Carlson, and some of you are still upset that we even brought the veteran in, even though the Red Sox retained 80% of his contract, but clearly he hasn't been the answer for us, and we could be looking in the coming weeks to trade for someone to take over for him, or perhaps just give one of our younger center fielders, Tim Gaglia or Tyreek Hardage, a little more playing time at Carlson's expense. We've had several injuries to the bullpen this year, so adding a big-time arm out of the bullpen is something that we'll probably think about doing in the coming weeks. And then anytime we can make the team better, we're more than willing to do it. So even if it's not a glaring need, if there's a player where we can upgrade, it's something that we will certainly think about because we've got plenty of money to bring on somebody who can help us over these next several weeks as we approach the trade deadline. But as I mentioned, the focus of this episode and the focus right now is going to be turning to the first year player draft, where we are picking 35th, and we also have a supplemental pick for the loss of Jorge Carrillo, who is the one of our 5 starters from last year who's not back with us this year. He ended up signing away from us this offseason. We didn't make a real serious attempt to bring him back. And we have a compensatory pick, which will be the 40th pick in the draft between the first and the second round for him as well. So although there's not a ton of great talent left on the board here at number 35, we do have 2 of the next 6 picks. So we should have an opportunity to hopefully bring in a couple players who can eventually be competing for spots on our major league roster 3, 4, 5, 6 years from now. And I highlighted some of the top players who were available at the end of our last episode, so I'm not going to just completely repeat myself. But I don't think I'm going to go with a position player here. I don't love anybody who's available, and some of you have commented that this is kind of a meh draft at this point. Might be some big-time players who went in the first 34 picks, but there's not any superstars left. To me, our scout recommends that we go with Malachi Newman, who he sees as a 5-star prospect, by far the best of the hitters available. But when I look at these left fielders, starting with Newman and then going through Savion Etienne, Chris Hall, and Javara Ainsworth, they're all kind of the same guy. Could have decent home run power, decent contact, not tons of speed, not great defensively. You know, they've got some different personalities, different kind of demands that they're looking for, but I don't have a real strong view on any of these four. I don't know that I'm going to pick one of those four with the 40th pick in the draft, but there's certainly no reason to pick one of them now, given that I think they're all ultimately pretty similar. I did kind of highlight in the last episode that the center fielder, Ken Ferentino, I did like a bit, perhaps even like a bit more than some of those left fielders we talked about. Contact is the best of anyone we've looked at. He's got some durability. He's got the best outfield range. He's also a guy who, with his ratings, can play a outfield position, could also play a corner infield position, thinks he can be a second baseman. Don't love the low leadership, but I also don't love him enough that I'm willing to take him with our first pick here in the first round. So, in a roundabout way, what I'm telling you is that we are going to go with one of the pitchers here. And a guy that I highlighted in the last episode is a 4-star relief pitcher prospect, Wally Schatzner. And the reason I like Wally is not because he's a reliever. Would be very hard pressed to find a situation where I would take a reliever in the first round. But he's got high adaptability, work ethic, and intelligence. And he's also a guy who looks like he could be a two-way player. And quite honestly, when I look at his ratings with potentially well above average contact, excellent gap power potential, and excellent at avoiding strikeouts, and a guy with a decent amount of speed, he could be a pretty useful hitter. I wish he potentially had a better eye to draw some more walks, and we know he's not going to have any power. But he looks like he could have a useful bat. He's a switch hitter, and he's also someone who looks like he's versatile enough to play just about anywhere on the diamond except for catcher. That 65 outfield range, he could play center, but he could be a good left or right fielder. With that profile, he could play third base. At 6'2", he could clearly be a decent first baseman, and could play him at second or short if we had to. Don't love that option. So thinking about him as a two-way player, and some of you have commented on this, a little bit of a awkward combination perhaps for the AI to figure out how to use perfectly if he's a reliever slash utility player, but could probably tweak the settings a bit if he developed enough to be a major league pitcher and a major league position player. Don't think he's a superstar, but I am intrigued by his versatility. Among the rest of the pitchers, I think the one that I am most intrigued by is Chris Lott, almost 19 years old. He is a guy who could have a 3 to 5 pitch arsenal, most likely probably a 3 or a 4 pitch arsenal, but his fastball, his forkball, and his sinker aren't too far off major league quality. And if he fully develops, we see him as having plus stuff, plus movement, and really good control, ground ball tendencies, not looking for a ton of money. So I like Lott, but I think there's a decent chance that Lott will be available 5 picks from now, or 6 picks from now, I guess, since we haven't made this pick yet. To be fair, I think there's probably a pretty decent chance that Wally Schanzer, I'm sure some of you will tell me how to pronounce it. A lot of these names are recycled names from previous major leaguers. I see this name and I was thinking of Dan Schatzeder, who I think was I want to say maybe he was a reliever back with the Tigers back in the 80s, but that is not the same name as Wally here, so I'll probably need to figure out how to pronounce this if we take him. But I am most intrigued by his two-way tendencies. Not looking for much money either. So we are going to go ahead and draft Wally here, and we'll move ahead to our 40th pick. And Chris Lott is still available. I'll take a look at how many of the position players are still around. And all three of the left fielders plus the center fielder, Ken Ferrantino, are still around. I like Lott the most. 6'9", 200 pounds. Not looking for a ton of money. I don't think he's a star prospect, and there's certainly no guarantees that he's going to develop. But as I said, he's my favorite overall prospect of the starting pitchers. So we are going to go ahead and grab him with our supplemental pick as well. I guess I should see what the scouting director recommends, but I would tend to think it's still going to be the same guy. Yeah, still Malachi Newman. But we are going to go with two pitchers back to back, pick Chris Lott, and then see who's available for our second pick. Still a couple of starters that we've checked out in the past, so I'll spend some time with them. And then looking at the batters, one of the left fielders, Javara Ainsworth, still around, along with a few players that we looked at last episode. So I'm going to spend a little time offline now and start planning what we'll do in the second round after going with a reliever and a starter with the first two picks. Maybe there's an argument to get a little away from the pitchers and find if there's an everyday player who we think can help. But it is overall a pretty underwhelming class of prospects that's still available to us at this point. I guess the nice thing about Ainsworth is because each of our first two picks have demands. Well, Shanzer, that's what we're calling him. Shanzer is well below slot. Lott seemed like he was going to be below slot, but he's really at slot. But we still have a little bit of saved money from those two. And then as I talked about, we also have a lot of extra money in the budget at this point. So that would allow us to perhaps go with someone like Ainsworth if he lingers, or even potentially the impossible to sign Chris Bolton, since we're going to have a little bit of extra money to potentially spend after we get through this draft. And not surprisingly, since we didn't love the options in the first round, definitely don't love any of the options here in the second round. For us, it's come down to a couple of third basemen, and we are going to go with the one ultimately that our scout recommends. I'll show you the two of them first, and you can maybe guess who our scout would recommend. One of them is Pat Thompson, third baseman, almost 19 years old. A pretty well-balanced hitting profile. Like the fact that he's got a little bit of speed and has a third baseman type profile. Could certainly also play first. In theory, he's a second baseman as well, and could also play corner outfield in a pinch if we needed him to. So a little bit of positional versatility, but not necessarily at the most impactful positions. Does certainly have the arm of a third baseman. Similarly, Greg O'Shaughnessy, another guy who's almost 19 years old. Not quite the same type of contact and gap power, but similar home run power, potentially better eye. Not as much speed, similar defensive profile. Not quite as good with a turn double play rating there, I don't think. Another guy who could also play a corner outfield spot in a pinch. Like the work ethic and the adaptability with him, don't love the low intelligence. It's kind of a toss-up for me between these two guys. I certainly don't love either of them. Our scout recommends Mr. O'Shaughnessy, and I think that's the one that we are going to go with. I like that combination of plus home run power with a plus eye, with a guy who could definitely be a defensive third baseman. Would hope that maybe his range and his error rating get a little better. Also, like the work ethic and the adaptability, just in terms of hopefully developing him into someone who will be useful to us down the line. Definitely intrigued by the above average speed of Pat Thompson, but in a best case scenario, he's kind of an average-ish type of bat. Error rating a little lower, turn double play rating a little bit higher. Certainly more versatile defensively, but as I said, it ultimately pulled me to O'Shaughnessy as the high adaptability and particularly the high work ethic to hopefully help that development actually take place. And the combination of a third baseman who will draw some walks and hit some homers is not unattractive to me. Not looking for a ton of money, so we are going to go ahead and meet his demand and move on to the third round. And before we get to our third round pick, I meant to mention I did check on Dan Schatzeder, and I'm sure one of you was upset with me for characterizing him as a Detroit Tiger. And he was a Detroit Tiger in the early 80s, as I thought. I remembered his 1981 Topps baseball card for whatever strange reason, the one where the team name, the Tigers, was in the hat in the bottom corner of the front of the card. For some reason, that was the card I remembered. But he spent most of his 15-year major league career with the Montreal Expos, so I imagine that three-quarters Badger probably remembers Mr. Schatzeder much better than I do. Moving on to the third round, our scout is recommending the catcher Jaheim Minifield. Don't hate him for a third round pick. Above average catcher ability. Don't love the below average arm, but he does have a batting profile that for a catcher, particularly someone who maybe ends up as a backup catcher, is decently acceptable, if that's actually a way to phrase things. But Javara Ainsworth is still around, and as I mentioned, we do have extra money to potentially spend. And Ainsworth, although we were never going to take him in the first round, I don't think is bad value in the third round. He's a corner outfielder, not a ton of speed, but he is a guy who, if he fully develops, is a bit above average in his contact and his eye, with decent home run power. So seems like he could be a useful pinch hitter slash fourth outfielder, and maybe if his hitting develops fully and he gets a little better defensively, could be a starting left fielder down the line. You'll see that there's a number of three-star catchers who are available, including Minifield. I don't even know that Minifield's my top pick of the four. I think he probably is, but I think it's conceivable that somebody like Minifield's still around next round. Now, you could say that with the $5.5 million price tag, Ainsworth might be around in the fourth round as well. And a lot of times I would wait on somebody like him, but given that I think he is the most well-rounded hitting prospect left in the draft, we are going to take Ainsworth here in the fourth round and auto draft. And now here, or that was in the third round, and now in the fourth round, it looks like Minifield is still around. Our scouting director continues to recommend him. Actually, all four of those three-star catchers are still around here. I think I'm leaning towards one of them. We've already seen Minifield. Okay potential bat plus catcher ability, like the high leadership. Chase Benyard, 18-year-old, a little better defensively overall, although his catcher ability is a notch lower. His arm is much better. Another guy with a potentially useful bat for a catcher. Omaro Kruer, 18-year-old, probably the least attractive defensive combination of any of the catchers we've looked at. Could have plus contact and plus home run power. And then there's Jeff Rodriguez, 18-year-old, not the most attractive defensive profile, average defensively with a weak arm, but a useful-ish bat. So to me, these four are in a way similar to the four left fielders we talked about at the top of the first round. I think they're not perfectly interchangeable, but I can't make a case that one of them is going to be a star and the other three are all going to be flops. They're all kind of players who seem okay-ish. But we're going to go with Minifield. He's got the highest catcher ability of the group, even though it's only a little bit above average. And as we talked about, is potentially above average in contact, home run power, and eye if he completely develops. Like the high leadership. I've been looking at the pitchers available online, and there's just not a lot there. Brad Wilder is a guy who's marginally intriguing to me, a little more developed than your typical high school player. Decent contact, but just don't know how useful the bat will ultimately be unless he completely develops, and don't love some of the personality traits with him. So we are going to go here with Minifield. We are going to just meet his 800,000 demand to get him locked up, move on to the fifth round. And our scouting director is back to recommending a pitcher for us here, Gadget Kirchner. His control seems like it's going to be a concern. His mind tends to wander. I just don't think that a pitcher with 30 control is someone I could ever take, despite the fact that his stuff, his movement, look like they could be well above average, and his forkball and his sinker both look like they could be pretty useful pitches, but I don't think that's a profile that I'll be going after. But we will be going after a guy that I believe I mentioned at the end of the last episode, and I've had my eye on over the past few rounds, and that's the impossible to sign Josh Forbes. I think we'll take a flyer on him in the fifth round. He's durable, decent stamina, decent at holding runners, guy who looks like he could have a 2 to 4 pitch arsenal. No guarantees that both the curve and the changeup develop, but if at least one of them does, more likely the changeup, he could have a 3-pitch arsenal. Stuff, movement, and control are all potentially above average. Don't love that he's 18 years old and he's barely throwing in the 90s, but he is a finesse pitcher. Don't think he's an incredible prospect. Don't know how much money he's going to be looking for. He's really probably a guy that we only try to sign if we don't spend a ton of money bringing on contracts as we approach the trade deadline. If we've got money to spare after that, we probably get into a situation where we throw most, if not all, of the money we have left at him and see if maybe we can salvage a guy who could eventually be a decent major league pitcher here in the fifth round. So we are going to go ahead with Forbes here in the fifth round. And if I do anything interesting over the next several rounds of the draft, I'll let you know. Otherwise, I'll see you on the other side. And perhaps not surprisingly, for a draft that we weren't incredibly thrilled with, nothing real exciting over the last 15 rounds of the draft. So we have completed the 2037 draft. We've got offers out to all of our picks in the first 4 rounds. We'll wait and see what happens with Forbes. We ended up also in the 6th and the 9th round taking a couple of guys who are looking for much more than slot or mysterious amounts. So no guarantees that we'll end up signing any or all of those players, but we will likely cross those bridges late July or August after we've figured out what we want to do approaching the trade deadline. And I had mentioned that we may be looking for pitching help with the fact that Pat Mems and Robbie McCracken had both suffered serious injuries. And unfortunately, Eddie Mosley, who was on a rehab assignment in AAA, had done a pretty good job down there, but he just had surgery to remove bone chips. Actually, it was 5 days ago at this point, but just noticing now because I've been focused on getting ready for the draft. So he will not be back this year either. So what that means is we definitely could use some help with our pitching staff. Adrian Morejon is a guy who was with us years ago, has been in our minor league system the last few years. Returned to the majors. He's done fine for us as a lefty. We've also got Danar Polite up, who we picked up on the waiver wire earlier this year. Mike Waters was a guy who we had in the minors at the start of this year. Matthew Wenzel is a guy that we've thought about sending down on multiple occasions. So we're definitely in a situation where we don't have quite as good a bullpen or quite as experienced a bullpen as we've perhaps had in some previous seasons. So I think that looking to bulk up the bullpen in particular, the pitching staff in general, is probably something we'll be seriously thinking about over the next several weeks of game time. And with that, we'll call it an episode. I know it's a short one, and we didn't even actually move the day forward at all because we're still on draft day. But in our next episode, we'll sim through the next few weeks of the season, check in on exactly how the team is performing at the midway point of the year, and start to really formulate a plan for what we want to do as the trade deadline approaches. But I know it's been a couple days since I put an episode out. It's been busy at work for me, but wanted to at least get a quick episode out for those of you who have been waiting for it. And I do thank those of you who have been waiting for it and those of you who are loyal viewers and frequent commenters. If you haven't subscribed to the channel and you're still listening, please do so. And as I said, in our next episode, we'll focus on getting to the midway point of the year and doing our annual mid-season check-in to see with 81 games of action who's underperforming, who's overperforming, who might be an all-star, and who we might need to move on from, and really formulate that plan that hopefully will ensure we can guide these Buffalo Wings to a 10th straight trip to the playoffs and put ourselves in position to at least get a chance at defending our title in the postseason. Until that next episode, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.